What's up, everybody? It's your boy C. Sams, and this is That Comic Show. The comic book genre has been around for quite some time, since the early 70s. We saw a lot of comic book movies that came out, most notably Superman and Batman. Those two movies were basically running the scene back in those days. We also got some less than favorable movies. Wow. So the comic book movie genre has come a long way. Over the years, we started to see brand new characters hit the screen with the addition of Spider-Man, X-Men, Green Lantern, Green Hornet. Yeah, we've been through some ups and downs. But one thing is definitive and one thing is very obvious. The MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is by far the definitive comic book movie genre. We're going to take a look at some examples and we're going to break this down because I want to show you that this comic book movie genre is by far the best example of how to make a comic book movie genre. Now, if you feel so differently, please comment below. Let me know if you see things very different. But I'm going to break it down and I'm going to explain to you just why I feel that the MCU is the best comic book movie genre. The format of a comic book. Now, if you've ever read any type of comic book, you always have to start with issue 1. Issue 1 is going to introduce you to the character or characters of your comic book. You're also going to see the backline characters. You're also going to see the villain. You're going to see the setup and everything that's going on in the background. This is what's called a comic book. This is what's called the first issue, a basic comic book layout. Your character is your hero. You have an antagonist or your villain, and then you have something that they're fighting for, something that they have to work towards. That's how a basic comic book starts out. So let's take a look at the MCU. The first issue came out in 2008 with Iron Man. We see for the first time Robert Downey Jr. playing the role as Tony Stark. Now, during this, we don't see a lot of Easter eggs unless you were really looking for it, but you just saw a basic character development of the main character of the MCU. After the movie was done and everything was finished, we saw Nick Fury step out and say, "I want to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative." Right then and there, you have an idea that something bigger is coming from just this movie. Now, as that movie dropped, other movies came afterwards. Now, each movie has their own story, has their own villain, but in the background looming is the actual villain of the MCU, which is, now that we all know, Thanos. We get all the way to issue 6. Which is the Avengers. Now, this is a combination of all the movies that came up, which was Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America. Once these movies dropped and these issues came out, you have the big team up, which is the big issue number 1, Avengers. After Avengers was done, you got into more comic book movies, which also were different issues. Remember, when you're reading a comic book, yes, you get a lot of campy stuff in a comic book. A comic book is comedy. So when you're reading a comic book, you get a lot of stuff, a lot of nonsense, but they're all working out to help you understand and relate more to the hero, not necessarily the villain. Now, you have plot points. Your plot points in your movie is basically for your character development. These plot points are there to develop your character and to build your character up. A lot of times people say a lot of criticism related to the MCU is basically because of the fact that they don't take the time to establish their villains. They don't take the time to make their villains seem more relatable or make their villains seem more threatening. And which is a really good observation. But if you take a look at any comic book, when is the villain usually the center point? There are some comics where you will get that, but overall, it's the hero story that you're on the ride for. It's the hero's development. We saw with Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor, their development throughout all 3 of their films. We saw how they started and where they ended up and the type of characters they are. And the villains that they met along the way only helped them to build up their characters. That's what the villains are there for. Now, with every single issue, there is a bigger boss looming in the background. So whenever you take a look at any comic book for the Avengers, you understand that there is a bigger boss that is waiting, a bigger boss that is watching everything play out. And when the time is right, this bigger boss is going to reveal himself. That's what comic books is all about. That's how a comic book is broken down. You have a crossover. Now, the crossover is basically what we just mentioned, the Avengers. The Avengers was the first time that we actually had a crossover of all these different characters. Spider-Man, unfortunately, didn't do a crossover. Spider-Man was isolated in their own universe. This is why Spider-Man eventually came to Marvel, because this is not where the comic book movie genre is. Unfortunately, Justice League failed at the box office and fails with critics because of the fact that they went about things in a totally different direction. They put all their laurels on Batman and Superman, and when you look at it, nobody wants to see a character by themselves. They want to see the character in part of a bigger universe. That's why when Dark Knight came out, everybody enjoyed Dark Knight as a great movie with comic book themes, not a comic book genre movie, because there was nothing that developed the overall universe within this movie. Man of Steel came out, and Man of Steel actually started making strides in doing that and introducing certain elements from different parts of the universe. And then unfortunately, they did Batman vs. Superman, which kind of crumbled the foundation they started to build. And then Justice League came out. It was just a movie, where the Avengers seem as though that it's an event. The movie that's coming out this year, Avengers Infinity War, is an event. People have been waiting 10 years in the making for this to happen. People have been watching this villain in the background of these movies now on center stage. And everybody is excited about this movie. This movie is going to break box office records. This movie is going to be an event that people could talk about for years to come. Unfortunately, when it comes to Justice League, it's just another blemish on the DCEU, in my opinion. A cohesive storyline. The Infinity Stones have been a mainstay in all of the MCU movies up until this point. Yes, you have some movies that are isolated and that deals directly with the character and doesn't deal with anything else. But when it comes to the Infinity Stones have played a role in the movie's development. You see it in Captain America as the Tesseract. You see that plot device. And then after Avengers, we start to see other Infinity Stones reveal themselves. We see the Ether in Thor: The Dark World. We see the Orb in Guardians of the Galaxy. We see the Mind Stone that was first introduced in Avengers. We start to see it in Avengers 2, Age of Ultron. Then we start to see the Time Stone with Doctor Strange. The one stone that we haven't seen is the Soul Stone, and we're going to be revealing that very soon in Avengers Infinity War, or we may not see it in Avengers Infinity War. Food for thought. But the point is, it's a cohesive story between all the comic book movies. You have to read issue 1 to understand what issue 10 is all about, because all the stories are connected. Yes, the characters have their own stories and their own story arc, but their overall storyline and cohesive story is the Infinity Stones that are connected between all of the movies that we've seen since 2008. Lastly, the villains. Now again, the villains are just there to build up your character, build an emotional connection to your character. I'm not going to have an emotional connection to Whiplash. I'm not going to have an emotional connection to Malekith. I don't care for those characters. Those characters were only there to boost the main character, the good guy, in order for them to get to their realization in where they are in the universe. That's all they were there for. And that's exactly the point. We have to get to the understanding that this movie genre are going to have villains that mean nothing. They're going to come, they're going to die, and they're going to be wiped out. But remember, the main villain of the movie is the big boss that's been sitting around since Avengers, which is Thanos. Thanos is the villain of the MCU. So all those other villains that you saw before, they mean nothing because they're just there to build the main character. When it comes to the actual villain, it's Thanos. If you read any comic book, the big blow-off event, Secret Wars, Infinity War, the big blow-off event usually comes in the form of a big boss coming to destroy everything. And all the little bosses that were once there mean nothing because this bigger boss has all the power and all the motivation to do just that. He's already seen the other superheroes fend with other characters. Now he understands how to defeat them because he sees their weaknesses. That's the whole point of the villain. So, when it comes to the MCU is a cohesive storyline with the Infinity Stones. It has a major boss, which is Thanos. They have crossover events like Civil War and Avengers, where all the characters come together and then they go back to their separate movies. They have the plot points that builds the character's development, and they have a format. Their format is just of a regular comic book. We are getting to the last issue, the season finale, or the last big blow-off event, which is Avengers Infinity War, and after that we're going to continue on with the issues. I think we're at issue 20 something, who knows, but this is exactly why the comic book movie genre has been transformed by the MCU. Now, can DC do the same with their movie cinematic universe? Possibly. Do they have to start from scratch? More than likely, but it's quite alright, because guess what? It's been proven that the MCU can create a comic book movie genre, so that way DC can do the same exact thing. Spider-Man is now with the MCU, so Spider-Man's universe are going to spin off based on what happens in the MCU. We now have X-Men, Fantastic Four, the Galactic Universe, that other side of the Galactic Universe. Now we can build up these stories and build them off of the success of the MCU. Once again, everybody, this is a breakdown, and this basically explains how a comic book can go from just being loose leaf papers to being on the cartoon stations to now being a genre to where everybody is excited when a movie such as a MCU movie is getting ready to drop. Just to give you food for thought, Black Panther is still #1 in the box office for 5 weeks straight. And on top of that, it is well over $1 billion. Who would have thought that Black Panther would have gone that far? I'm so excited for it. And I hope you guys are excited for what we're going to get after Infinity War. Once again, the MCU is the perfect example of a cinematic genre. Please comment below. Let me know your thoughts. And if you disagree, please, let's have a discussion. This is your boy Sam's. This is That Comic Show. Zams out.